Hi, I'm author Camille Maio, and I am continuing my series where I chat with people who are in the book world but who are not the authors. Because even though it's our name on the front of the book, I guarantee you that there are so many people who go into the successful production of a book. And today, for the first time, I'm really excited to talk to Elizabeth Wiley, who is an audiobook narrator. And Elizabeth and I met a few months ago at a book festival and just hit it off right away. And I told her then I would love to have her on this, and she graciously said yes. So I will say though, my involvement in my own books audio has been extremely minimal. In my case, my publishers pick the audio narrators, and being somebody who's a little afraid to read or listen to her own work, I've barely even listened to my own audio books. But my husband has, and he says they're great. So I know there's a lot that goes into it, but I'm coming in as a very blank slate who doesn't actually know a lot about it. So Elizabeth, I'm excited to have you on. And maybe you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about like a broad brush stroke of what recording audiobooks is like.
Sure, I'll do what I can. Hi, I'm so happy to be here, Camille. Thank you for asking me. Um, and we met at our local book festival,
Mhm.
which was so exciting that we have that here in our burg. Uh,
Mhm.
so yes, I'm Elizabeth Wiley. I've been recording audiobooks for since 2012, really. I sort of started in 2011, but things kind of got rolling in 2012. And at that time, I was a theater professor
Mhm.
for 27 years, and um, and I picked up audiobook narrating because I was looking into for various reasons. I wanted an extra income stream as my kids were heading to college. I always wanted to do voiceover as an actor. Um, I love storytelling, and it was also I was catching the wave as audiobooks were growing as an industry, and as a teacher of acting, I needed to kind of get the lay of the land for students and help them see what are the possibilities
Mhm.
out there, what can they do with their craft. And so I did bring that back to the classroom. I was a professor at William and Mary. um, so I ended up retiring early in 21, um, not just because of COVID, but there were a lot of factors, and I felt like I have been so grateful to be working in my field for all these years, and now I just love audiobook narration, and I wanted to leave teaching before I felt like I was starting to phone it in, you know. Um, and I just felt like, gosh, I feel like now's the time um to set that chapter of my life here and give full focus to books. So I've I've been happily doing that. So that's how I got here.
Well, that's exciting. And, this is very naive on my part, but it hadn't occurred to me until recently how important acting is in the art of doing audio narration. And I think I really realized that most recently when I was listening to Tom Lake by Patchett, and Meryl Streep was the audio narrator. I didn't even
I
know she
listened
did
to
that.
that one
I don't
too.
know. Wow. I felt like Meryl Streep was telling me a story, and the voices that she took on. And then right now I'm listening to The Chaperone by Moriarty, and Elizabeth McGovern is the audiobook narrator of that one. I'm going, oh, acting is really an important part of this. And so I've been fortunate to listen to a lot of good audiobooks that have really captivated me, but I have seen that the ones who have acting as a profession, they don't have to be at the Meryl Streep level necessarily, but I do see how much that factors into quality narration. So that I totally get why you said, that you had a theater background and what you bring to that. So as you do that, do you have a particular genre that you gravitate toward, or do you do a lot of broad ones?
Great question, Camille. And I'm so glad you mentioned that about acting because it absolutely is so important. And for people who come into audiobook narration without an acting background, they and of course they have good instincts, so they wouldn't try to be doing that, but they also find that okay, if I need to like maybe take some acting for audiobooks, or looking
Mhm.
more into the craft of it to kind of up their game there. But to your question about genre, um, I I I did a little pie chart of my genres last year
Mhm.
just to see where they all landed over the years. And I have covered a lot of genres. Interestingly, when I started, um, I did a lot of romance then because, well, my voice was a little younger then. But also it's such a ubiquitous genre. I mean, and it's gotten more popular and more forefronted over the years. So so that was kind of my in, if you will. Um, and then as I, expanded more into other genres, and now I've sort of landed in a place that I do a lot of history and biography and nonfiction, but I also still adore doing fiction. But as you can hear, my sounds mature. Um, and
Yeah.
so uh I can communicate the importance of with heavily researched history pieces with gravitas, but I also love to play the cozy mystery retired journalist who now helps solve her small time
Oh, that
crimes. Yeah.
Miss Marple type as
Yes,
well.
yes. Yeah.
Is your process do you read the book all the way through before starting the narration, or do you dive right in, or what kind of prep and research do you do?
For it for me yes, reading the book to to various degrees is essential because you don't want to find out suddenly in chapter 10 that one of your main characters, oh, is actually from Greece. But that I would say that would be like, well, you didn't write that in there earlier, but but it's happened, uh so I with fiction I read the whole thing because I like to also um highlight with different colors who's talking when. I need to see the arc of the story. I need to get a sense of the relationships and how a character might grow or change over the course of the story. Um, and then for all the books, and this comes up especially with nonfiction, I need to see if there are things I need to look up. Names, places, um, uh, concepts that I need to understand in order to talk about. Uh, and sometimes those, when I remember narrating what was it called? It was basically the history of Poland. Um, and so I felt like by the end of that book, I could see a Polish name and know how to pronounce it.
I'll bet. Now, do you have any kind of questionnaire with the author or conversation with them in advance? Or what's your communication with an author to figure some of those things out?
That is a great question. I usually don't get a conversation with the author.
Mhm.
They go through, if, okay, let me qualify that and say, if the author is going through their publisher producer, um, the publisher producer handles that. And they like me to ask questions to the publisher and then they go to the author. Um, because sometimes there are authors who are very separated from the audio production part of their book, and it's like, oh, yeah, I okay, you're bothering me with that, and I'm on a book tour, and um, but if I'm working more directly with an author, an independent project, then um, I would I would get more input in advance of recording from the author. Some producers do have a questionnaire they send out to authors, particularly with, say, fantasy, where they're inventing worlds and species, and it's like, how do
Yeah.
you pronounce? And sometimes a question has to go out that really only the author can answer. I remember doing a story, it was a romance back when, and um, and there was a name, there was a main character name that could be pronounced two or three ways. And and said, well, we have to ask the author. And it's not just, well, you pick. It was, I'm so glad we asked because she said, oh, I named that character after my aunt, and it
Also, it
has
was real
to be
specific.
pronounced this way, which is like, oh, that is not the way I would go to. So, so yeah.
Yeah, that's good to know. On the author end, same thing. I don't get to communicate with the audiobook narrators. My publisher does all of that, but they do send me a questionnaire, and it will cover
Good.
things like, is there any pronunciation you need to be aware of? What's funny is by the time that I received that as an author, that book is so past in my mind because by the time the book is in production and about to be released, my own brain is fully in the research of the next book that I'm doing. And so
That,
I sometimes feel
yes.
like I'm doing a disservice to the narrator because I have to go, what? I have to think of my entire book and think of what I might need to pull up as a pronunciation item. I don't remember the details like that when my head is so fairly, so much in another one. But I have had a few occasions where the narrator, in the process of doing it, has come to something that in the middle of the book that they want to ask me, and the publisher makes that communication happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I will say, as an author point of view, though, I would never be bothered, and I think most of my friends would agree, if we were included a little bit more in that process. Like I would never be bothered, even on a book tour, for something I think so, somebody is putting voice to your words, but the publishers are, they who they are. They're kind of like not gatekeepers, but they're the middlemen
Yeah.
of this whole thing.
Glad
So
to
I'm
hear that. I'm really glad to hear that. And
absolutely.
and I totally get and kudos to you for like you had you're done with this book. You're writing your next one because you are very prolific with your work. It's fabulous. So yeah, because you get in that world and then suddenly it's like, yeah, you have to pull those files out from the back of your brain.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
It's when it's such a broad question, it stops you. I did have one experience with one of my books recently where I got to audition some voice actors. Now they were already pre-selected or narrowed down by my publisher, but that was so exciting for me. It was one where I had a male lead and a female lead, so I got three males and three females to choose from, or at least to give my input on. I don't know if I was the ultimate decider there, but that was the first time I'd been included in even something like that. And it was a different publisher. That one was Hachette. And I really liked being a part of that. So
That
that was nice. I think authors would love to be more involved.
yes, yes. And I mean, actually once it gets to that stage, Camille, where they're sending you a short list, um, it is your choice. I
Mm,
mean, I mean, well, I guess I can't get inside everybody's brain, but pretty much, they're saying we could go with any of these voices would be great.
okay.
What do you want? And
Oh,
so
good. Maybe I did pick them. But again, like I said, I don't listen to my own audiobooks or read my own books afterwards. So I don't know if they picked who I picked. But that was fun to be, have a little insight into that process. And
let
so
me
Elizabeth, do you have any highlights of, like, do you have a book or a moment that stuck out to you as so great? And conversely, do you have just like a disaster moment story?
um okay. Those are yeah. Okay, so I think that as I was saying about reading and prepping, there was one disaster moment, and this was early in my time of recording. And I was doing a series. There was like seven, eight, nine. I mean, and they kept coming out, a book series. But I started recording on book number three. And I remember asking the publisher then, it's like, why are we starting on book three? Can we start on book one? And they're like, well, we don't have the rights to those yet. So we're just going to start
Mm.
here. And I got up to like book five or six. And they said, oh, we have the rights to books one and two now. So I went back to book one. And there was like five main characters, and each book was like about a different one of them, in this group. And that one of these main characters, that was book one. Well, they don't talk about his sexy, intriguing Eastern European accent at all in the other books. But then book one is about him,
Oh.
and she falls for him because of his intriguing, mysterious accent. It's like, oh my God.
Oh, wow.
That was how, ooh, um, yeah. So
Yeah,
that
that's something to
was one
navigate.
of those, oh my God moments. Um, and then I guess that there's so many joyous moments because I love doing this. Um, I have one author that I I do most of her books, and and we know each other, and so she and I knew from one of her first few books that she puts a lot of sound effects in. And this is she writes for middle grade and young adults. So, and then the birds came and then the sound of the subatomic explosions and then she would put she would write it out, kapow and zing. And so I have just a great old time like what does that bird sound like when it's approaching the water? And I'm pulling up old World War II black and white videos of bomber planes, and it's like, oh, that is so much fun.
That sounds fun. I didn't think about the sound that would come from that sort of thing.
Yeah,
That's really neat.
so
So
it's
do you
very.
have like a dream author or dream genre, just something you haven't done yet that's sort of
Hmm.
up there as a goal?
You know, I will I will happily say I'm a Louise Penny fan.
Hmm.
And so I love that genre, the mystery genre, but I also love the sort of philosophical, ethical conundrums that she brings up with this rich tapestry of characters that we get to know over this series. Um, so yeah, I dream of Louise Penny.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah.
Now, where do you find your clients, Elizabeth? And it sounds like you have a mix of authors independently and publishers, but how do you get the word out there that you do this?
And mostly now I work with, and I've been fortunate that most of the time I work with publishers and producers. Um, and I separate those because there are production houses that um, that get assignments from the publishers themselves. Here's a Hachette book. Can you
Mhm.
produce it? And so, but I have developed um, relationships over the years through going to conferences and attending webinars and just doing this reaching out on email with the casting people at these various places. And so, and then you check in with them every now and then and say, oh, hey, I have this new book out that got a great review, just updating you, or hey, I just came back from Sweden and I feel like I can add a Swedish accent to my
Mm.
arsenal. So, you try to reach out and just not be forgotten because there's a lot of people out there. It's like, oh yeah, Elizabeth Wiley. Oh yeah, Elizabeth Wiley. I should see if there's something that comes up. So, when they have a book that comes up that's like, that voice could work for this 75-year-old serial killer,
Mhm.
which is actually a book I have coming up.
Oh,
Um,
fun.
yeah. So then they say, are you interested in auditioning for this or being submitted in the short
Mhm.
list to this author? And I could say, oh, yes.
Uh,
So yeah, when you're a private contractor, you got to keep doing those reach outs. Like I'm sure you had to do when you were looking for an agent and a publisher. It's like,
Oh
oh,
yeah.
how many times do you send out and get the no's back? But you just got to keep
Oh yeah. This
doing
is
it.
business is full of rejection. And what's crazy is you get into any kind of creative endeavor because your heart is in the creativity and the art of it. And then you do realize that if you'd like to actually make a living from it, there's a huge business angle. And I think a lot of us creatives are not always good at self-promotion, but we have to learn to be. So I didn't think
We
about that on the
have to
audio
learn
sense
to be.
too, but that makes sense.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Got to stay relevant. So, what would be your number one piece of advice of somebody wanting to get into this? Where should they start or what should they know?
Well, I would say both to people wanting to get into the narration end of it. And I would also say to authors who want their books to be in audio, listen to audiobooks. So you first of all kind of know what you like and you hear what works and what doesn't work, and you realize that there are people have different listening preferences. Some books lend themselves more to more expressive, more fully diving into the character, and other books and other narrators and listeners want to hear it more of just read the words. And I want to paint that picture of who James is in my head. I want so there's there's different preferences. But for getting into it, start attending some of the national conferences. There's
Mhm.
the Audio Publishers Association conference that happens in the spring. Um, and nowadays it's live one year and in virtual the next. There's a voiceover Atlanta for the voiceover world overall, and then they have an audiobook track so you can kind of meet people and learn about it that
Mhm.
way. And start to make your connections. And then there's if I have people that I know or write to me and say, I'm kind of interested in this, I always send them to narratorroadmap.com, which is kind of a one-stop shop of here's all the articles and blogs and how-tos, uh, and also there are other places, narrator.life.com. No, not .com, narrator.life.
Mhm.
It's a collection of coaches and
Mhm.
classes. So there are places now. When I was starting, it's like, there wasn't all of this. It's like you
Yeah.
had to figure it out. But now there are so many coaches out there and so many opportunities for incoming narrators to learn about how do I do this? Who do I contact? Where do I go?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
but
I will totally confirm that I think conferences are the best thing. I spent several years writing my first draft and was getting nowhere with it. And I bit the bullet and saved the money and went to a conference in New York, just a 3-day conference. And oh my gosh, it revolutionized everything. It was the craft classes, the contacts I made both professionally and among other aspiring authors. And I made this group of really good, 6 other women that I met there. All of us were aspiring authors, and every single one of us is published today now. I think there was something about building community and going to a conference that just professionalized everything, and it is worth the investment. So that's really neat to hear that that happens on an audio side, because and this is why I love illuminating this through these YouTube videos, because there's such a depth when we're just hearing the voice of the narrator. To me, it's kind of like, well, do I like this or do I not like this? But that's so tip of the iceberg compared to what you're talking about, with all that goes into it, the research, the communications, the connections, and everything else. So like every aspect in the coming together of a book, which is what I love to illuminate, there's every bit of that has depth that we don't see. So is there anything that I haven't asked that you would really love people to know about
hmm.
what you do?
Maybe if you were to say, what should an author think about as they're writing, and they know that audio is gonna be one of the formats, I would say after you finish a chapter or as you're writing, read it out loud and see how it flows. But I will also say, Camille, that I have been listening to Come Fly
Oh,
With Me. I'm
oh,
way
good.
through it, and I think you're writing great for audio.
Oh,
It
good.
flows well, and your narrators are making it work well. And yeah, but sometimes we'll get books that are like, that is really the longest sentence in the world with no, or did you say those words out loud together? Because they did. Yeah. So
No, that's really good advice on the author front. I don't know. I know for sure I don't, and I'm not sure that any of my author friends write with audio in mind specifically. Although I do know some who do read theirs out loud, so that is a really good tip, but I didn't think about that specifically for the audio narration. And now that I think of it and we're talking, I'm almost thinking that as I maybe go through my last round of edits, it might behoove me to make a list as I do that of things that an audio narrator might want to know, whether it's pronunciation, because like I said, by the time they get to that questionnaire, that book is so far in the distance that I can't come up with it. So maybe that's a tip to authors I'm learning just as I speak, is we should maybe make those notes as we go along so that they're fresh and so forth. So
yeah,
that's
and you know, and in those notes, of course, you'd include character information and and now, oops, those are my headphones just dropped.
mhm,
Um, and nowadays, nowadays makes me sound old. Uh, Casting in particular to if there's a a gender expression or a racial background or heritage that is part of the character, they'll do more to try to cast that authentically,
mhm.
if that's a main character, or if
Yeah.
that, or if you're doing a multicast and that person needs to be this. So, that would be something to note in your character stuff. I don't need to tell you this, you know this. But when you're working with historical fiction, I imagine there's, some references that, I mean, that's part of our research too, is to understand the era that the author's writing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So
No, that makes sense. Well, I love that. I think that next time I listen to an audiobook, I'm going to think about it in a much more 3D way. So I appreciate you illuminating all of that. My last question will be, how many books have you done so far? Do you know offhand?
yes, I keep a running tab. I think I'm heading this summer, I'll be heading up to 220,
Wow, that's really
which
neat.
it sounds like a lot. But there are other, I mean, there are other people who, and right now I would call that I'm doing it sort of part-time. I mean, like half time. I spend maybe 20 hours a week.
Okay.
Um, it varies from week to week. But there are crazy busy narrators who book themselves so tightly, because they're trying to pay the bills and pay for this and that, and they will be doing 100 books a year. That's more than 2 books a week. I don't even know how they can do it.
Wow.
But
That's a
sometimes
lot.
that's like I'm doing this character in the book, and there are two other people doing the other two characters,
Mhm.
or I'm doing a chapter here or an introduction there, and we count those too. So, you know,
So if somebody watching said, I loved listening to Elizabeth, I'd love to hear an audiobook. What's the best way to find that? Like if we put your name in Amazon, is it going to come up with everything that you've been credited with reading?
yep, just enter
Okay.
Elizabeth Wiley, and then all of those choices will come up.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll go do that too. And where can people find you? I know you're on Instagram. I follow you there. Where do
Thank
you
you.
like to keep in
Um,
touch?
yes, I'm Wiley Voice on Instagram, and also Elizabeth Wiley on, well, I don't use my professional page on Facebook as much. I don't do TikTok. I don't find that I narrate books that are a TikTok audience
Mhm.
as much, but I know it's so huge with people. I have
Yeah.
a website, wileyvoice.com.
Oh, okay.
It needs updating, but it's pretty thorough.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that's how you can find me.
That's awesome. Well, good. Well, Elizabeth, thank you for taking the time to chat with me and illuminate a piece that I know for myself I haven't given great thought to, but have been the recipient of both as an author and as a reader, the tremendous talent that it takes to do with you what you do.
Thank you for being curious. I
Yeah,
mean, it's part of what we do, and we have to just uphold each other, and we are all in the storytelling business, so we got to make it excellent.
I agree. And like I said, I often feel bad as an author that my name's the big one on the cover, but I know that there's just been a mountain of people who've gone into making it happen. So that's why I like to dig into this a little bit more. So awesome. Well, thanks for visiting.
It has been a pleasure talking with you. I'm so glad we met.